welcome to Media Monitor on SABC News Channel 404. I'm Sakina Kamwendo. Good morning and thank you so much for joining us. Well, here's what you can look forward to on today's show. We'll take a look at the resignation of former President Jacob Zuma and the inauguration of President Cyril Ramaphosa. We'll unpack the highly anticipated State of the Nation Address 2018. And lastly, we'll speak to a Zimbabwean journalist about the passing of former opposition leader Morgan Tsvangirai earlier on in the week. Well, we're pleased to be joined this morning by University of Johannesburg Associate Professor and Political Analyst Mcebisi Mlechana. We also have SABC Presidential Correspondent Tsepo Ikaneng and Digital News Producer Butkule Putini with us. Good morning and thank you all for joining us. Before we get into all of that, we start with the Sunday papers and look at what's leading this morning. The Sunday Times leading with the story about former President Jacob Zuma, who is set to get his day in court almost 9 years after the NPA let him off the hook. Now, the charges relate to the arms deal corruption involving his former financial advisor, Schabir Sheikh, and will, according to highly placed sources in the security cluster, be reinstated in the coming weeks. City Press is running with a story about President Cyril Ramaphosa's cabinet reshuffle, creating panic among serving cabinet members. And the newspaper further reveals that the 5 cabinet members identified as Gupta ministers will probably be the first to go. Sunday Independent also leading with the Hawks continuing to hunt for Ajay Gupta, and they're also intensifying their search for former President Jacob Zuma's son Duduzane, who's alleged to have been on the run since Wednesday, and they believe it's only a matter of time before Duduzane is declared a fugitive, according to highly placed sources in the security cluster. KZN Sunday Tribune also leading with the story about a looming cabinet reshuffle, with President Ramaphosa refusing to indicate how soon this will happen. And Human Settlements Minister Lindiwe Sisulu, Science and Technology Minister Naledi Pandor and National Assembly Speaker Baleka Mbete have been tipped for the position of Deputy President. And finally, the Weekend Argus, they're also running with a story about a cabinet reshuffle. Ramaphosa is expected to reshuffle cabinet members, with calls mounting to specifically fire Finance Minister Malusi Gigaba ahead of the budget speech on Wednesday. Ramaphosa has not indicated how soon that reshuffle will happen, despite giving clear indications that heads will roll. Well, that's what you can look forward to in the Sunday papers, but we shift focus now to our digital segment, where we take a look at the hashtags that created the most noise on social media platforms this week, and we do this with Butkule. Please run us through it.
Good morning, Sakina. Thanks for having us. The first hashtag we'll look at is hashtag Zuma resigns. The former president did resign on Wednesday night, and a lot of people were excited. Some people were expecting it for him to resign, and some wanted him to stay. So if we look at our Storyfy there with the tweets, it says, the first one says from Uzolisa, the first one says, hashtag Zuma resigns. Thank you, Ngamalala. You will always be my hero, no matter what people say about you. The next one from Klinifa says, I will miss the drama in Parliament, hashtag Zuma resigns. And lastly, this is a tweet from a school teacher who had announced to her pupils that the president did resign, and they showed a lot of excitement, screaming and shouting, and she says, these are the real reactions happening from the people who matter the most around the country, when you know you should have left long ago.
Very, very interesting, but we're not getting into schools and what happens there and what teachers do and children say and parents and the influence that they have. We
did ask people on social media how they felt about the resignation, and people showed that 27% did say that there won't be much change. 48% did say I'm happy, 10% said I'm sad, and 15%, is that 15% not sure how to feel about the situation is.
And those are interesting numbers there, because evidently not everybody is convinced that there will necessarily be change, Professor Mlechana.
Well, politicians have said a lot of things in the past that never happened. So there's a lot of distrust, really. They still have to prove themselves. Yeah, they made the right noise, but again, past behavior tells us that politicians promise, but they never quite deliver.
And of course, this electorate is growing smarter by the day. So what else has been trending?
The second hashtag we have is hashtag SONA 2018. So our current president, who is Cyril Ramaphosa, was elected to be the new president, and he did do the SONA speech on Friday evening. So a lot of people say that his speech said a lot of things that the public want to hear. It showed hope, some were excited. People are excited to have change in the country. We've had President Jacob Zuma for the past 9 years. It feels good to have a change. And Lamola says, I don't see the need to have deputy ministers in government. Each government department have a Director General. Deputy ministers are a waste of taxpayers' money. Hashtag SONA 2018.
That's an interesting one, Sepo Ikane. I mean, if we're talking about a reconfiguration of cabinet.
Yeah, the talk is about lean and mean government. I mean, the people are talking about being the bloated civil service, bloated cabinet from 28 during Big era to about 74 now with the deputy ministers. People are saying we really need to get it trimmed.
The next tweet, Sakina says, SA Twitter must be represented or else all SONA 2018 speech was just another narrative to make us go to bed. I guess black Twitter, it feels like they need credit for what's happening in our politics today. And
with all the summits, we might as well have a social media summit as well. I don't know. Black Twitter will probably be happy with that.
Yes. The last tweet says, I agree. The purpose, as mentioned at the SONA 2018 by President Ramaphosa, was for productive agriculture to benefit the economy. GDP is important. And one more tweet that I really liked, Sakina said, Cyril Ramaphosa is the current hero. He'll soon be the monster. And lastly, will be the enemy of the country. So things can change.
As they usually do.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Butkule, and that's, of course, what people were talking about on the social media platforms. But, of course, the big question, what next for former President Jacob Zuma? Find out more about that when Media Monitor returns.
South Africa is in need of a frank dialogue about the state of our nation. My name is Onkgopotse JJ Tabane. Join me on Frankly Speaking every Sunday at 8:30. Come now, let's talk frankly.
Let's cross over live to Griselda Lewis, who is standing by at the arbitration hearings.
But I didn't think about it at the time that people could be dying.
Let's update your sports news.
Get all the dominating stories locally and globally on Newsroom every Monday to Friday from 9 a.m.
Well, today we discuss the general practitioner or GP.
So the quality of the doctors coming through our medical schools is excellent.
Your GP is your family doctor. Your GP is your first point of care.
Who determines how much a consultation fee should be.
We set up networks of general practitioners, and one of the conditions of the network was to agree to charge a certain fee.
Specialists are specialists. We can't take away their role. We can't take away what they do for each patient in their disease entity.
Our specialist colleagues as well don't appreciate patients coming straight off the street, as it were, to see them. They're highly trained.
For health tips that will help you to adopt healthy living, catch Health Talk every Saturday from 9 to 10.
What a week it's been, and after all that suspense, former President Jacob Zuma announced his resignation in a late-night televised address to the nation on Wednesday. The announcement came despite the initial refusal to resign, even in the face of a no-confidence vote supported by his own party. Zuma's former deputy Cyril Ramaphosa was sworn in as president on Thursday. And let's take a look at more of what happened in this insert.
I have therefore come to the decision to resign as President of the Republic with immediate effect. Even though I disagree with the decision of the leadership of my organization, I have always been a disciplined member of the ANC. As I live, I will continue to serve the people of South Africa as well as the ANC, the organization I have served all of my life in it.
And of course, that was President Jacob Zuma tendering his resignation early on in the week, Wednesday, Valentine's Day to be precise. And we're also joined now by Dr. Azar Jammine, who is the chief economist at Econometrics. Dr. Jammine, thanks for joining the rest of the panel.
Pleasure.
And I just have to start with what many people have been speculating about regarding President Jacob Zuma's resignation. People were talking about a disjointed speech, because earlier on in the day it seemed as though he wasn't going to resign, and then we heard people were sent to speak to him, to prevail over him, and ultimately that seemed to have worked. Did you get a sense, Professor Mtlechana, that that speech was a bit disjointed?
It was disjointed. I think it was JZ's last defiant stand. He didn't want to be pushed because if he just reads a speech stepping down, he's not really explaining himself. He looks weak, he's being pushed. He has a very strong guy conception of leadership, so he wants to show people that he can't be pushed around. So that afternoon speech was really necessary for him to say his say, and then once he feels that he has told people what he thinks about this thing, then he can easily step down. But the point is, I am stepping down, but I'm also not stepping down as a weak person. I'm not running away. I have made my stand, but the Constitution and my party demands that I stay. So that was a last defiant stand, so that he can then step out, kind of face-saving last measure, so to speak.
Dr. Jammine, some would say Zuma playing the victim once again, and that makes it almost vintage Zuma.
Without a doubt, he played the victim. But speaking to many people about that speech, one got the impression that many thought that he was building up to defy, not to resign, and then and right at the end he said, I hereby resign. But a lot of people thought that this is building up to us having to go to a no-confidence vote, and then right at the last minute, at the very last minute, he says, no, I am going to resign. Whew, big relief on the part of how many millions?
And you know, big relief on this part of some, not all, as we saw earlier during the digital segment, how people are still divided about, you know, whether this indeed will change anything for South Africa. But what has been the role of the media, Tsepo Ikaneng, in ousting President Jacob Zuma?
SK, I was there. I was at the Union Buildings when that late afternoon speech was made. The call came and then the SABC got that exclusive. It left many global networks. They were basically camping outside of the Union Buildings, and people say, what is it really saying? I mean, they had to cross live to their broadcasters abroad, and there was no clear message as to what is happening, and there was so much anxiety and confusion up until the late night statement by the president. So obviously it caught everybody by surprise. Up until the last minute we knew what was going to be happening, but the media, I mean, it was tenterhook situation up to the last minute, and that's when we got that late night message, and it was broadcasted obviously everywhere else.
But in terms of the lead up to that eventuality where Jacob Zuma finally tenders his resignation, Professor Mdletsana, how would you characterize the role that the media played?
Well, the media, I think the media was, firstly, the media is not quite fond of JZ, and the feeling is mutual. And there was a lot of worry, I think, after that defiant kind of militaristic speech promising all sorts of hell should he leave. There was a lot of concern that in the last few hours with him at the helm, he might do something stupid. Because he was quite angry in that afternoon speech. So the fear was that he might lash back. I mean, I remember doing an interview earlier saying, I worry what is likely to happen between now and tomorrow. And also because I didn't think that he would resign, you know, because he didn't give any indication that he would resign. He's not scared, you know, that warrior-like presidency mentality. The media reported based on what was there, and I think they got it as honest as they could, given the circumstances.
And of course, is there anything that Cyril Ramaphosa and the ANC have learned over this past week alone, given just how tumultuous it was?
I think Cyril Ramaphosa learnt, and this was conveyed in the SONA speech, that it actually pays to look more relaxed and to smile and to actually make it seem as if everything is just being, it's part of the run-of-the-mill.
And of course, it's not going to be an easy walk in the park for Cyril Ramaphosa, Professor Mdletsana. Some have already said he was part of the Zuma administration, the second one at least. Some have already said, well, how much can he actually change, given that it is ANC policy that has to be implemented?
The ANC is complicit in creating this monstrosity that became Zuma's presidency. Beginning in 2007, there were signs a year after he was in office in 2010 that you had a different animal altogether here. Zwelinzima Vavi even coined the phrase parasitic elite hyenas, because he had seen that already there was siphoning of money. They went on to elect him again in Mangaung in 2012, knowing that he was a disaster. He continued to do a lot of things. They praised him, they hailed him, they said a lot of stupid things. Some of them even said that we should be arrested if we criticize the president. So they are complicit. And quite soon we will hear about the extent of corruption with this commission coming up. And this is corruption not only among national ministers or among national figures. You have corruption at a local government level. The Auditor General tells us every year that so much amounts of monies are unaccounted for, they are stolen. So we know that corruption is widespread. So the question is, will Cyril, because he has to shake up the entire party structure, because this corruption is perverse and widespread. The question is, will he get sufficient support from the ANC? Because some of those who might be implicated in this corruption might actually be his allies. And he also has to think about re-election later on. So to what extent do you shake up the party? Because a lot of people benefit from corruption and they're willing to resist it right up to the end. Will he have the necessary support to change the party? That's yet to be seen. It's not clear.
And one of the other things I've been thinking about is exactly who is Cyril Ramaphosa's constituency, Tsepo Ikaneng? Who has his ear right now?
When I heard from Julius Malema, he was asked by one journalist as to, is really warming up to Cyril, say, doesn't have any constituency. He's an ally of people who wanted to bring him there. He even posed a question as to whether if somebody wants to purge him, who would rise, in which village, in which township, in which city. He describes him as somebody who doesn't have a constituency. But if you look at the reaction of the markets, if you look at the general feeling of the people, including for the first time after many years within the National Assembly, where you had a standing ovation from all across the aisles of the party politics, people were really warming up to him. So you could see it has brought a breath of fresh air in terms of how people want to engage, even to the body politics, including people. When you look at the social media, okay, we know, like Julius says, social media doesn't vote, but the euphoria that comes after his speech really instilled a lot of hope. So we still have to see within the first 100 days, I think we should, as per rule across the world, to say what is going to be doing in the first 100 days. Let's maybe try to judge him after that.
Speaking of constituencies, perhaps the markets and, that sector as a constituency, and how have they received Cyril Ramaphosa, and are they going to make him, going to make it any easier for him?
Without a doubt, there are two specific constituencies that one can identify. The first is all those who support the market system in the country and abroad, and that includes the financial markets. And we've seen that the rand has appreciated by about 25% since people started anticipating that Ramaphosa would become president. One shouldn't exaggerate and ascribe the rand's appreciation entirely to Ramaphosa faction. It's also been a weakness in the dollar. But the fact is that the rand has gained even 15% against the pound and the euro, not 25%, but 15%. So Ramaphosa thing go down very well with the business community and the markets. The second big constituency, I would submit, are the stalwarts. I recall speaking to stalwarts many, many years ago when they were very upset with the election of Zuma and say, who should we be having as president? And this is now 10, 15 years ago, and they say Ramaphosa is the obvious one.
And talking about state capture, devil's advocate has to come into play here. We talk about presidents being captured. They're not necessarily captured when they ascend to the presidency. One would, you could argue they are captured before that. Professor Mdletsana?
Well, capture to what extent? I think we shouldn't confuse terms.
Capture to the extent of influencing a president to actually give expression to whatever your ideals and your wishes are.
Let's cut through the chase. Are you saying, is Cyril captured? No, I don't think he is captured. He does, of course, come from business. In this country, everyone realizes that you need the market to create jobs. 70% of the jobs will be created by the private sector. So it would be absurd of anyone to have a hostile attitude towards the market. It wouldn't make sense. You need to cut them, right? Especially because you say you need their investment. So Cyril is good for the country in that he straddles all constituencies, Labour, business, and the ANC. And there's a lot of expectation. I think he will face more pressure than everyone else because already he comes in with suspicion like yours that he's captured. So he has to prove that he's not captured. And also this idea that he's a creation of white capital.
I'll tell you what my suspicion is. I'm not suspicious about, him being captured because, as you say, it's a very loaded phrase. And depending on what capture means to you, everyone could be captured by some or other force of sector. However, one of the things Cyril Ramaphosa said during his SONA speech, he spoke about getting out of this negative mindset. And I couldn't help but think, you know what? that is not a function of speeches and rhetoric. That is a function of implementation of policies that actually bring about action that would remove people out of that negative space. Give a man a job, put him to work so he can regain his dignity by putting food on the table, and then you tell him to stop being negative. But we'll talk more about SONA 2018 after this break.
Special assignment. Crime keeps the society in terror and pain. Why so?
If someone phones me, tells me, okay, look, he needs a silver, and I get you all driving, I'll take it.
What pushes normal people to be so hard, heartless, and brutally kill one another?
The other side of it could be more for their own psychological need. It might be part of a sexual fantasy that they have. It could be about power and control.
After proper investigation is followed, the perpetrator gets arrested.
It was quite a massive process. And ultimately they were criminals, so I think justice is served.
Emotional scars remain.
We would pay any price to get him back, and the sad reality is that it's gone.
Special assignment. We unravel the truth every Sunday at 21:30.
Welcome back to Media Monitor. Thanks for tuning in. Now, newly elected President Cyril Ramaphosa delivered his first State of the Nation address on Friday. And many feel that the speech was mainly what South Africans wanted to hear after nearly 9 years of broken promises. Ramaphosa touched on critical issues challenging the country, such as economic transformation, youth unemployment, and tackling corruption, amongst others. The question many are asking, though, is will he fulfill these promises? Whether he has the right team to see him through, and of course many other questions around that particular issue. But let's listen to some of the reaction of the opposition parties.
The need and acknowledgement that our people are in absolute pain. And so I think it was an important acknowledgement from the president. What we needed to hear more is immediate and decisive steps. We needed to hear more about how we restructure the state, what changes we're going to bring on board. And so I felt that the speech recognized that the past, the Zuma administration, will be carried on in some of the programs going forward.
We welcome the issue of expropriation of land without compensation. We welcome the reducing of government departments. They were too big and too many for nothing. We also welcome the fact that he has recommitted to allow law enforcement agencies to operate without any interference by politicians.
I think that the president himself summed up what his message to us when he said this is the era of renewal, of change, renewal and hope. I think that sums up what he said. Because in all the years I've been here, we've had very erudite and very good speeches by our heads of state. But I think I admire the president for unpacking exactly what he's going to do.
He definitely gave hope to the nation. The atmosphere in the house was electrifying. It was full of hope, full of joy, and it reminded me of the days of Nelson Mandela. That was the last time with Mandela I saw the happiness, the joy. I mean, people gave him a standing ovation even before he finished his speech. That has never happened before.
And as the Reverend Kenneth Mishwe says, you know, the one thing that was evident from the opposition parties, everyone who attended that State of the Nation address, and even the broader public, was there was the sense of optimism, you know, almost a sense of pride rising again, like, yes, that is how we see ourselves, how we want to be represented.
Yes, I'm an euphoria of optimism, and even the politicians, many journalists, they were able to be there to be interviewed, unlike before where they'll have to maybe bounce that with their superiors elsewhere, but they were able to say it out from their hearts. I mean, they would speak without getting any kind of a mandate from a headquarters somewhere else. So you could just say that these people were...
So what are you talking about?
I'm talking about the politicians who were there. I mean, really, I mean, it was a euphoria of optimism. I mean, they really, I mean, from what we saw, standing ovations and their reactions to say, let's give them a chance, like Reverend Mishra saying, we even gave him a round of applause and then even alluded before he even finished his speech. So we could see that really, I mean, this way winds of change blowing.
No, absolutely. But the task ahead is quite a daunting one. We're sitting in a country where the challenges are many and they are complex, Professor Mdletsana. You look at things like the unemployment rate. Before we even get into specifics like the youth unemployment rate, that is a thorn that has been in the South African flesh for a very long time. It's festering and we don't seem to be able to arrest it. Do you think that given his connections to business and the confidence that that particular constituency has in Cyril Ramaphosa, we will finally be able to make headways in that regard?
We should be careful that we don't place too much faith on other people rescuing us. We had a similar approach earlier on in the late 90s, early 2000s, when Thabo Mbeki had to do all sorts of reforms in the hope that the private sector, international investors would come on board. They didn't. By the 2003, he was quite disillusioned with all this talk of you do A, B, C, and D, then the market follows. We need to do the best that we can to regenerate our own economy, to make sure that things function properly. We ultimately have to rely on our own resources because if this thing has to change, we don't know what these people think of us. They might have prejudices, they might think we are yet another typical African country. The private sector in this country has been sitting on billions of rands apparently. Fortunately, as I hear, so he might be able to answer. When in fact everything, well, at some point everything looked fine under Thabo Mbeki, and yet they didn't come to the party. We made all sorts of concessions. They left, they enlisted elsewhere. So we cannot take these things as a given. What we can do is to rely on ourselves and be the best that we can be. And fortunately, in future then, after a while, whoever might be looking will be convinced that these people are a real deal.
Dr. Jamin, what does Cyril Ramaphosa have to do in the immediate term to unlock those billions that the private sector has refused to invest in the South African economy?
First of all, I must say, just talking about the SONA, it was wonderful to feel, wow, we've got a president that we can be proud of, finally. The second point to make, what can he do? He has to try and make people believe that somehow we can start uplifting the growth rate of the economy. It's a huge challenge. In the very short term, he's got two immediate challenges, and that is, firstly, how does he tell public servants that they can't actually earn a hell of a lot more and keep pace with this cost of living, because he's going to have to try and cut back on government spending in order to reduce the budget deficit. And he's also probably going to have to sell the concept of an increase in the rate of VAT, which is not going to be very popular. And we'll know all about this by Wednesday. From a longer term point of view, how does he ensure, you mentioned just before the break, how do we get South Africans to be more productive? The obvious way is to educate and train them better so that they can add more value to society, so that by adding value, more value to society, they can earn more income themselves, and that can help to reduce unemployment and inequality. But that's a long-term process, and until such time as people see that happening, you won't get the kind of massive investment that we require. But I am optimistic that with a change in the atmosphere that we have seen in the last few months, you will see some of those billions sitting in private sector balance sheets, actually just coming forward a little more than before. And that's the start of a gradual improvement trajectory. But the key is, are we going to be able to be patient enough to wait to see the process gathering momentum?
And that's the million-dollar question. But of course, also coming to Wednesday, Cabinet and, Malusi Gigaba as the Minister of Finance. And a lot has been said about, whether or not he should be the person to deliver that budget speech.
Yes, I'm also very skeptical about whether it should be he, because he remains tainted, and I don't know how much it would take, but clearly it can take a number of years for him to try and convince markets that he is capable, because he has blotted his copybook by being associated with the introduction of poor governance at state-owned enterprises when he became Minister of Public Enterprises, and secondly, to cause a sharp fall in foreign tourism when he doggedly went ahead with visa application restrictions that people said it's going to kill tourism, and it did. And then he was forced to retract from that. So people don't have confidence in him, unfortunately.
Which is quite an interesting one, because it's not just Malusi Gigaba, it's ministers who have become associated with the Gupta name, and obviously whatever it was that they were doing, the largesse, etc., etc. But obviously Cyril Ramaphosa will have to make like a trapeze artist here and balance this very finely. How far can he go?
He can go some distance. I think there are obvious targets that should be taken out, approximately 8 to 10. But at the same time, these should be people who are evidently dirty. And not so much because they were associated to Jacob Zuma, because that would then seem like a purge. He still has to strike unity within the party, and he can have Zuma associates in prominent positions, for instance, people who have integrity. Nkosazana Zuma is one of them. The fact that you might have supported Zuma doesn't mean that you are entirely hopeless. Some people supported Jacob Zuma because of strategic reasons. In politics, there are a lot of factions. You have to align yourself with a winning group. Otherwise, you'll be kicked out. You have to wait for your time. But then there are those in supporting Zuma, they became complicit in crime.
Who are the ones who are evidently dirty? Your
former boss, Faith Mutambi, right, who created some clown called Cloudy Mutswa, what is his name? Mutseneng, I even forgot his name. And there was this clown. I mean, at the SABC, the institution almost became bankrupt. She linked cabinet memos, for instance. You have Ace, not Ace, well, he's on the line, but Zwane. Zwane also did the same thing, went and facilitated the sale of mines to Guptas. So there are obvious people that will be removed, even by Tabile Dlamini. I mean, the level of uncouthness, crude disrespect for the public, the way they spoke to us, as if they felt that they didn't have to account to us. So these are people that should be taken out. You must certainly have competent individuals, to people who will treat us with respect, who will show exemplary leadership. This is the critical thing, Sakina, if I might just say this. People can be inspired, and they're inspired by exemplary leadership. They might forsake an increase if they can see that the president is also walking the talk. He doesn't accept this. Purchasing of cars, the prices have been kept. Truly now, not the fake that they had earlier on when they said they wouldn't buy cars costing this much, and yet a lot of stuff came out saying that they did. So if you provide exemplary leadership, you lead by example, you can inspire people.
Absolutely. But of course, Tsepo Ikaneng, also that talk about, streamlining cabinet, streamlining government as a whole, but cabinet to begin with. And there was an earlier tweet during the digital segment about perhaps doing away with deputy ministers.
Yes, I mean, this is a crucial issue. I mean, he has made, President Cyril Ramaphosa has made very clear that he's going to have a lean and mean cabinet. People want that because people there's expectation out there as to whether the fiscus is going to supporting support staff, deputy ministers, and whether there's no need for reconfiguration, especially the economic cluster ministers, where you have small business, you have a trade and industry, you have finance and all that. And I think he made good in terms of making sure that people know that his intentions will be that we'll have a lean and mean cabinet, and I think it will save a lot of money.
But I think it's also incumbent upon the media to assist in this regard in terms of, let's just not be emotional about, okay, let's cut this minister because we don't like them, we don't like the look of them, etc., etc. If you take the Department of Small Business Development, for example, and as a, where they returned, how much was it? 120 million rand to the fiscus in a country where young people are struggling every day to have the small business department actually returning money. It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense, and it shows that the key to actually saving money and being more efficient is to make sure that your processes are such that you can cut out a lot of wastage and concentrate on what really needs to be done.
But Professor Mdletsana, that also speaks to a department that is perhaps not sufficiently capacitated, because clearly you're sitting with people who don't necessarily know what they're doing. If you can find money to return to the fiscus from that department,
it means setting up that department was not necessarily well thought out. It came up as strong as a result of strong lobby, strong pressure. So it was an afterthought. Then it was like, okay, what do we do now to put this thing together? They didn't have offices, the staff was not really recruited. They had to poach staff away from TTI. TTI, economic development, I really don't know what Patel does. Seriously, I don't know what it does. I think he was appointed as a reward to COSATU for 2007, Polokwane for their support. So you do have departments that are evidently useless, without necessarily picking on individuals, but department per se, their mandate, small business, TTI, economic development, all those can be put into one. And you might find similar arrangement as well in other departments that are quite similar in their operation.
And hence I say perhaps it would be prudent of the media to also look at unpacking those reasons, rational reasons as to why perhaps some of these departments may not deserve to be there. But of course we'll talk more about this when Media Monitor returns, but we are saying goodbye to Dr. Azar Jammine. Thank you so much for stopping by, but we'll carry on with the rest of our panel after this.
Take an in-depth look of all your stories of the day across the world. Stay tuned to Primetime News every day from 18 hours.
You're watching Media Monitor. Thanks so much for tuning in this morning. Well, Zimbabwe's longtime opposition leader Morgan Tsvangirai lost his battle to colon cancer this past week. The passing comes just months before Zimbabwe holds its first election without his longtime rival, former President Robert Mugabe, who he fought to unseat for more than 2 decades. Tsvangirai will be accorded a state-assisted funeral, and a public farewell will be held at the Robert Mugabe Square in Harare today, and he will be laid to rest in his home village of Buhera on Monday. And we cross now live to Channel Africa correspondent Simon Muchemwa, who joins us live from Zimbabwe in Harare via Skype to tell us more about what is happening in Zimbabwe following the passing of Tsvangirai. Simon, good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning to you.
Simon, firstly, this morning, what did Zimbabweans wake up to with regard to the mood in the capital on this day?
It's somber. People are still mourning, and some is still disbelief that indeed Morgan Tsvangirai is gone and has died, especially after what happened yesterday when we saw the South African Airways bringing the body of the late Morgan Tsvangirai, who is regarded by so many people in Zimbabwe as a hero, into Zimbabwe. And there were thousands of people, and the mood was just electric. Some decided to celebrate his life instead of mourning, and it was impassable. The road was just full of MDC supporters. But Morgan Tsvangirai was very popular with the civil society, was popular with the trade unions, the workers. He was popular with ordinary citizens, especially the rural areas and the working class, as well as some in the ruling party like ZANU-PF. So some wanted him to be preferred the status of the hero status, so that he will be laid to rest at the national shrine, which is the National Heroes Acre, but they are disappointed. He is going to be buried on Tuesday. Now the programs has changed. He's no longer going to be buried tomorrow, but on Tuesday at his rural home in Buhera.
So with regard to the people on the ground in Zimbabwe, we know that at one point Morgan Tsvangirai was hugely influential and very popular. At the time of his passing, what do people feel about him?
It was a bit of a mixture, because on one hand, we felt that there were some people who felt that Morgan Tsvangirai had failed because for 18 years trying to topple ZANU-PF, by then they had an agenda of trying to topple Robert Mugabe. But we saw what happened in November 2017, ZANU-PF using the military coup, or whatever they call it. Some are saying it's a military intervention. Robert Mugabe ended up resigning, and now we have a new president, Emmerson Mnangagwa. So the agenda of removing Robert Mugabe no longer hold water. But now they are faced with a new demon, Emmerson Mnangagwa, and the ruling party. The system remains the same. That's what some people are saying. And how are they going to face ZANU-PF now as the opposition? So they were pinning their hopes that MDC and the alliance of other political parties would actually actually join hands and make sure that they win elections once and for all, and make sure that ZANU-PF is done with. But now the passing on of Morgan Tsvangirai came as a big blow to some of the Democrats who felt that Morgan Tsvangirai was the only person capable of winning elections against the ruling party, either Emmerson Mnangagwa or Robert Mugabe. But now we see there's a young man who has just come in. He's now getting into the shoes of Morgan Tsvangirai. That's Nelson Chamisa. Still, of course, there's a lot of talk. Some saying this is a creation of ZANU-PF just to destabilize the opposition. But be it the case, whether you like him or not, you find that the alliance is supporting Nelson Chamisa, and he seems to be the most popular cadre at the moment in the opposition to fight ZANU-PF and Emmerson Mnangagwa today.
And who is the other protagonist apart from him? Because is there anyone likely to challenge him for that position?
In his party, that is MDCT, we have Thokozani Kupe, who was by constitution elected at the Congress to become the vice president. But you know what happened when Morgan Tsvangirai saw that you might become incapacitated? He decided to appoint 2 more people, Nelson Chamisa and Elias Mudzuri. These people were not chosen at the Congress. And there's a big discussion now and big debate in the party whether Nelson Chamisa should be the one to be taking over the reins of MDC. Some are saying no, that should not be the case. But we find some academics saying because the National Executive Council held a meeting on Thursday and agreed 193 against 210 members, that is more than 2/3 majority, and they actually agreed that Nelson Chamisa should actually step in an acting capacity for 12 months, and within the 12 months we are going to see elections. So Nelson Chamisa is likely going to become the candidate for MDC as well as the candidate for MDC Alliance. So yes, Thokozani Kupe is there on one side fighting with the constitution. Elias Mudzuri, is also fighting on one hand because he's saying that the elevation of Nelson Chamisa was not done constitutionally. But in terms of popularity and in terms of appealing to the rural people, to the electorate and so forth, it appears the bet is now going in the hands of Nelson Chamisa.
Well, Simon Muchemwa, thanks so much for that update. We'll leave it there for the time being. But to our studio guest, Professor Mtletiana, obviously a very sad moment and, you know, a telling time for opposition politics in Zimbabwe.
He was certainly a pioneer. Of course, he had his own personal problems the last few years, especially after his wife passed away. He couldn't keep his party intact. He had a lot of splits. But we cannot, what is undoubted, we can't take away the fact that he was a pioneer of opposition politics in Zim. When it seemed as if ZANU-PF was completely invincible, he stood up, he had guts, he was beaten several times. But he persevered because he believed that you need democratic representation, you need democracy. This is also a reminder that things haven't quite changed in Zim. Mnangagwa is not entirely different from Mugabe. Mugabe was toppled because of the Grace problem. Grace had become a problem. She wanted to take over. You know, so they really didn't have anything against the old man per se. So all the things that had happened in Zim, siphoning of money, violence, and this and that, all those things were done with Mnangagwa right at the center of the party. So this might not be a genuine beginning. It could be a false dawn. But of course, the economy of the country is now in tatters. They want to renew things. They are keen to attract foreign investors. So there is a lot of pressure to start afresh. They might not have believed in a new dawn, but this thing has kind of developed its own momentum, and they are looking to improve things. So to get there, you need to do things drastically different, even if you started off not believing in change.
Tepo?
Yes, I mean, like my other media colleague with strong knowledge of Zimbabwean politics says, this will be historic in a way that it will be the first time in history that we don't have the face of Robert Mugabe and one popular face of Morgan Tsvangirai in a ballot paper. So, I mean, you could just see that the elections that are planned later this year are going to be also gripping international attention in terms of going forward. But as to how the factions within the MDC team really unravels and see as to how they really manage this process forward is going to be a daunting challenge as to whether they'll be able to put at the fight because they want to claim the space that has been created by this colossal leader in Tsvangirai.
Well, absolutely. The proof of the pudding is, as they say, in the eating. So we'll see how all of this unfolds. But of course, we're going to end on a proud note today. The much anticipated Afro superhero film Black Panther finally premiered in movie theaters in South Africa on Friday. Now, Black Panther follows T'Challa, who, after the death of his father, the King of Wakanda, returns home to the isolated, technologically advanced African nation to take his rightful place as as king. Now, the movie stars South African acting legends John Kani, Connie Chiume, and they were also joined by American-based stars Lupita Nyong'o and Danai Gurira at the red carpet event and the screening at Monte Casino in Johannesburg. Let's take a look at this insert.
Black Panther is a world leader. That's a responsibility that other superheroes don't commonly have, that he has to look out for an entire nation.
Soon, there will only be the conquered and the conquerors.
The Dora Milaje are women who pledged their lives to the throne and to the security of the kingdom. Wakanda forever! My character, Okoye, is the general of the armed forces as a whole.
Okoye represents the old guard and tradition, while my character, Nakia, challenges tradition.
You get to decide what kind of king you are going to be.
Nakia was born to be a warrior. She was born with a warrior spirit.
I got into a disagreement. Made a bit of a mess.
Training was very, very interesting. The Dora have a way of fighting that was supposed to be inspired by moving as one. The Dora work together to take down somebody, like the fight we have with Killmonger.
Step into the spotlight. Action's there. It's not your typical film. It's raw. It's real.
Step into the spotlight. Don't freeze.
I never freeze.
Well, tantalizing. Don't miss out. We're going to leave it there. Thanks so much. That's it for this week's show. From the team and I, you have a great weekend, and we'll be back next week. Goodbye.